it's Shari here today, and I am going to be showing you how I made these quick and easy patterned paper cards. So if you're like me, you have a lot of patterned paper laying around. So I thought today I would show you some ideas of how to use those, especially using up some scraps. So we're going to be cutting a lot of strips and some squares, and these are some of the paper pads I'm going to be using. So just look through your stash, see what you have, find the colors you want to use. I'm doing rainbow, but you could do any kind of color scheme. You could just pick one paper pad and use all the coordinating papers in that one pad. Just do whatever you want to do that inspires you. So I'm going to be cutting strips that are 1/4 inch increments. So I'm cutting them at 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4, and then on the first card I'm actually going to cut the purple strip at the bottom to be 1 inch so that my sentiment fits on there. So I'm just cutting a bunch at random sizes out of each of the colors, and I'm going to use these to make all my cards. And I will cut a few more as I go, just depending on the sizes I need, but for now I'm just cutting up some strips. If you were going to make a ton of these cards, you could of course just cut the whole piece up into strips. For this first card, I have a top folding A2 size card base here in white, and I'm just going to lay my strips out in the color order that I want, and I'm just kind of spacing them where I want to space them to start with. So you can see there I went ahead and I cut another strip that was at 1/2 inch because I actually didn't have an orange one that was thicker. I'm varying the sizes as I do the colors, and I'm leaving a white space in between. So once I have all my strips kind of laid out in the order I want them, I've got my spacing pretty good, I'm just going to take my adhesive runner and put some adhesive on the back and just lay them down and use my grid mat to kind of make them straight. I'm going to start with the bottom, and then I'm going to start with the top, and then I'm going to work my way down. So this way I know they're going to be pretty evenly spaced because I laid them out beforehand. And starting at the bottom and the top, defining those spaces means that I'm not going to run out of space to where I don't have my white at the bottom or the top as I move up and down. But kind of making a plan beforehand does help with this. I'm not measuring anything, I'm not measuring the white space, I'm just kind of eyeballing it. So once I have those down, I'm just going to take my scissors and cut off the pieces that hang over the side of the card. Now I've got this Sending Hugs line border sentiment cut out of black cardstock. I'm just adding a little bit of liquid glue, and I'm going to layer that over the purple strip at the bottom. And this is why I cut that purple strip at the bottom wider than any of the rest of them, so that my sentiment would fit within that entire strip. Once I've got that glued down, I can just take my scissors and trim off that little bit of the line that's hanging off the edge. And I'm also going to add the dot of the eye, which is actually still in my die, so I'm just going to push it out by lining it up. That way I don't lose it on my desk. So I'll just trim off those little pieces that are overhanging, and then the sentiment is finished. I thought it needed just a little bit more, so I've cut out a couple little hearts from black cardstock just to come up from the side, just to add a little bit more to this colorful card. You could also add some sequins or some gems or any kind of embellishment you like to just add to this card. For my next card, I'm going to die cut a heart out of a piece of cardstock that has these strips on it. So I'm just tracing the heart die so I kind of have a guide as to what I need to cover with the strips. Then I can cover that whole heart with some adhesive runner. So once I have that whole heart covered, and I just made sure it was covered really well, I'm going to go in with my strips, and I'm only going to use the 1/4 inch strips on this one, so they're all going to be that thin strip. I'm just going to start covering that penciled heart with the strips of paper. Again, I'm doing this in rainbow order just as I did before, and I'm just making sure my strips go past that pencil line. That way I know when I die cut it that it will be completely covered in the patterned paper. And I'm just tearing the pieces off that are too long, or you can cut them off. And those I can use for another card in this video you'll see later. So you can keep your little scraps, especially if they're fairly long, and you can use them for another project as long as you're doing kind of strips. You'll see that on the last card I do. So now that I've got that heart that was penciled in there completely covered, you can see that my die is going to completely cut out that cardstock that's patterned, and I basically made my own patterned heart. So to add a little more interest to this card, I cut out a white piece of cardstock with the cross stitch rectangle stackable, and I'm just going to basically make a white on white mat to frame up the heart and the sentiment. I'm using some adhesive, but you could also use foam tape and pop it up, make a nice little shadow. My focus for these cards was to make them nice and flat so they could easily be mailed, and also keep the sentiments nice and simple so that you could use them for any occasion, just to brighten someone's day. I've glued my heart down in the middle towards the upper part, and then I've got a Scripty hug sentiment cut out of some black cardstock, and I'm just going to glue that straight to the heart. Now for my third card, I'm going to be making a little square patchwork. So I've got some strips that are all 1/2 inch here, and then I'm going to turn them the other direction and cut them again at a 1/2 inch, making little squares. Now these squares are not perfect. They're a little imperfect because they're cut with a paper trimmer, but I think that kind of gives it a little bit of character. You could also use a square die to cut these out if you wanted. The very smallest square stackable is about this size. I've also got a piece of white cardstock cut by 3 inches by 3 inches, which is pretty much what this should equal out to if all these squares are 1/2 inch. Now, like I said, they're kind of imperfect, so they're going to hang over the edge, but we're going to clean that up, so don't worry. I'm going to go in rainbow order to start off with, just like I have my pieces laid out at the top. And once I get the first row, then the second row, I'm going to shift, and I'm basically going to make a diagonal out of these colors. So once I've got the square all finished, you can see the edges are a little uneven and it's a little rough. So I'm just going to go in with my paper trimmer and just clean that up. So I'm just going to trim off those little edges that are hanging over and make this a perfect 3 by 3 square again. And once you get the edges cleaned up, you can't really tell that some of the squares are a little imperfect. It looks like your grandma's quilt. So I'm going to trim up all 4 sides so that they're all nice and clean. So this is the sentiment I'm going to use. I love this Chit Chat set. It is an older set, but I just really like that the little speech bubbles have the sentiments already in them, and I really like the solid ones. I think they are very nice and bold. So I'm using this Thinking of You because it's stamped solid and it has coordinating dies. So I'm just going to cut it out, and it's going to have a little white border around it when it's cut out with the die. So I've taken my card base and I've cut it down to a square that's 4 1/4 by 4 1/4. And then I'm just going to adhere my square right into the center of that. So it's got a nice white border around it on all 4 sides. And then for this one, I actually did use some foam adhesive for the sentiment. Now these are thin foams, so they're about half the thickness of normal. And then I just like the edge of this little speech bubble kind of hanging off this patchwork square. All right, so this is my 4th card. I've got a piece of cardstock that's 2 inches wide and 5 1/2 long. So the length of the card, we're going to make a landscape card. And I'm just going to cover that with adhesive, just like I've done all these other pieces. And then I'm just going to go in with the strips I've got left. I'm going to vary the sizes. I'm going to go in that rainbow order again, just so it kind of matches my collection here. but I'm just using what I've got. You can see this is where those little pieces come into play, because when you get to the corners, those little pieces that you pulled off before will fit in those perfectly. And then again, you just cut off the excess. And so now I've got this fun striped diagonal piece that I'm just going to mount towards the bottom of this landscape card. I'm going to leave a little bit of white at the bottom. I'm going to use my grid mat to make sure it's nice and straight. So I'm just going to use some liquid glue to put down this Scripty Friends die cut out of some black cardstock. I'll add the little dot to the eye, and then this card will be completely done. So I made 4 cards today out of pattern paper that I had in my stash using scraps. I still have some scraps and strips left over. I can make a whole bunch more cards. These were quick and simple and are sure to brighten anyone's day. So I hope this has inspired you to make some cards to send to your friends and to look around in your stash and use up some of those supplies that you've got sitting around. Thanks for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.